Hi, welcome everyone. I can't see participants right now, so I just wanted to start welcoming folks as you are coming in today. We will give people a couple of minutes to filter in, and then we will dive right into our session today. And first and foremost, I want to say thank you so much for sharing your time with us. We appreciate you being here to discuss, to learn, and to uplift bi-pan perspectives and stories. And please make yourselves comfortable as we will be starting in about 1 minute.
Jamie, there's a question about putting the link on the slide in the chat to make it clickable. So I think our link is in the top of the chat. If Joseph can drop it in again, that would be great.
Thank you, Jonathan. Yes, we'll be posting that periodically. It might not be clickable from the chat. You should be able to copy and paste it though, hopefully, into a new browser. And we will have the link up throughout different slides so that it will always be there. Okay, and so we're going to get started. And I apologize for not introducing myself. My name is Jamie Umanzor. I am your facilitator today. I use she, her pronouns. And welcome to Beyond the Binary, learning from bi-pan perspectives and stories. As you have seen, please do join us today at the web link at the bottom, polev.com/Jamie Umanzor 691. We will have our activities on that link today. So real briefly, we have our agenda. We're going to go through a welcome. We're going to look at myths, truths, and experiences. We'll then hear from our panelists. We'll have a wrap up and closing to bring us to an end. And as a content warning, there will be anti-LGBTQ triggers as we're sharing stories today. So please lean into the conversation to the extent that you're able to. We certainly would not want anyone to cross over their boundaries and experience any secondary or primary trauma through the discussion. So please take breaks as needed if needed. Okay, so welcome everyone. To help lay our foundation for uplifting marginalized communities and those most often targeted by oppression, we like to start off with a land acknowledgement. This was borrowed from the University of New Mexico, a beautiful land acknowledgement for the land that the hotel where we would all be right now, or where you may be, sits on. And so these are the traditional homelands of the Pueblo of Sandia, the original peoples of New Mexico, Pueblo, Navajo, and Apache. Since time immemorial, have had deep connections to the land and have made significant contributions to the broader community statewide. We honor the land itself and those who remain stewards of this land throughout the generations. We also know that this land acknowledgement is just the first step, but not the only step. We must all do our part to fight for representation, reparations, and racial justice for Indigenous people, the Black, Indigenous, and BIPOC community, and everyone else who is systemically targeted by oppression. We encourage you to get creative, donate your money, volunteer your time, raise your voice, and never erase the whole history of the land that you all call home. Okay, thank you for that moment. And so our objectives for today, we will be recognizing how debunking myths and stereotypes of non-binary orientation can reduce erasure. We'll then identify some strategies together to support our bi-pan community. We'll also celebrate and affirm bi-pan identities through storytelling. And so as you saw at the beginning here, and for those who are just joining us, our activities will be through Poll Everywhere. So please visit that link. The first question is already live, so please answer that question. That is a poll question. When we have our word clouds, a main tip is use single words, not phrases, because each word will pop up as one entry. We also have some questions where you can upvote. These we ask for whole thoughts and phrases. And if you see a thought or a question that you also would like to hear a response to, or you would like to acknowledge, hit that little thumbs up for upvoting. And then during the last portion for our key takeaways, also again, whole thoughts and phrases, please. And for our group discussions, I forgot to edit the slide. I apologize. We will be using Poll Everywhere for the group discussions. However, please do engage in the chat. Our other panelists, who I will introduce in a little bit, will help us with the chat when the time comes. And then if you haven't seen it already, we have our Whova handout with a great number of terminology that would be important for today, and also information on our panelists. Okay, so who do we have today? Again, I am Jamie Umanzor. I use she, her pronouns. I am the founder of C3 Equity. I'm also the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for Howard Brown Health. And one fact about me is that I am a huge gaming and Dungeons and Dragons nerd. And next, I will pass it on to Alicia.
I'm Alicia, and I do advocacy work, particularly within the Seventh-day Adventist Church for affirming theology and inclusion. I have a book coming out soon, and I don't know, I have an adorable dog named Prescott.
Yay!
Excellent. And I'm Jonathan Drummond, and I'm coming live from Oklahoma City today, Oklahoma. I practice medicine. I'm an eye surgeon by trade, but in my second career, I went back to seminary and I'm an associate pastor at the Mosaic United Methodist Church here in Oklahoma City, where we are part of the Reconciling Ministries Network for the United Methodist Church, and are seeking justice through our congregation. So that's how I spend my most of my free time. Thank you, Jamie.
Thank you, Jonathan. And this is Jamie resuming the facilitation. So let's go to our very first poll for Poll Everywhere. I'm now going to share that screen. Thank you so much for those who have responded so far. If you have not had a chance to respond, please keep answering. As you'll see, will change live as we answer the questions. So thank you for those of you who have shared. We see that a large portion of us here today are physically, romantically, intellectually, and or emotionally attracted to more than one gender. We see a little bit under a third are only attracted to one or the opposite gender, and a small percentage of you who are figuring this out. And for those of you who are figuring this out, we applaud you. It takes a level of bravery and courage to dive into yourself and figure out who you are and what makes most sense for your authentic self. And hopefully through these discussions, that can help bring you closer to figuring that out. Okay, so now, actually, I apologize. We're gonna have to switch back and forth with us switching to virtual. We're gonna need to play with this a little bit. So I think, in fact, that might be, yes, so our next topic. So that was the introduction and the opening. Thank you all so much. Part two, this is where we're gonna talk about our myths, our truths, and our experiences. And so with that, we are going back to our next question. And so thank you for those who are already responding. What are some myths, truths, and stereotypes and hurtful stigmas that you've heard? And so if you agree with something that's being said, please upvote it so that we can see what the top myths and stereotypes and hurtful things that you've heard. And so far, I see, let me see if I can hide this. Yes, okay. So far we have our top responses: that we're confused, it's just a phase, that we're hypersexual, half straight, half gay. I apologize, I think I said that already. And I'm not able to scroll down, so keep upvoting. We have some new ones here, the newest ones here at the bottom. Can't make a choice, why bother, we're dishonest, we'll end up with the opposite gender. We've also heard that non-monogamy is an automatic assumption for bi or pan people, that we love orgies, attention seeking, experimenting. Yes, so we have heard a lot of things in this group. Thank you so much for sharing. We're going to move on to now the next question. So considering now the other side of who we are. And so, and let me do a little bit of resetting here. When we say bi and we say pan, we don't mean just those two particular identities, just bisexual or just pansexual. Really, we mean any non-binary orientation. So whether that is omnisexual, whether that is polysexual, not to be confused with polygamy. What are the truths that you have heard about yourselves or of those that you know who are under the bi-pan umbrella? And yes, this is a word cloud. So the more that you say that are the same, those words will get bigger, and then it'll just add all of the words. Thank you. So I see authentic and accepting as two of the large ones. Beautiful, open-minded, honest, limitless, loving, open. Limitless is such a beautiful way. I would like to call that out. Non-monogamous, expansive, accommodating, brave, beautiful. Oh, this is gorgeous. Thank you so much. I'm going to let a few more come through. Nuanced, free, cute, transcendent. Oh, these are, I hope you all are smiling as much as I am right now, because it's so affirming to see this, because it really is more about who we are rather than the stigmas and the stereotypes that plague our community. Thank you. Okay, once I move on to the next one, it will close this particular word cloud. So closing in just a couple seconds here. And then in fact, I'm going to leave that open and go back to our slide deck real quick. So we talked about our myths. We are on our truths. And so let me double check our time here. Okay. So now we're going to talk about dismantling the myths and celebrating the truth. And that's our next question here. And so this is also an upvoting opportunity. What can we do to help in dismantling all of these hurtful things that we've heard, what was shared a couple of slides ago, and even things that may not have been shared or highlighted on that slide? And what can we do to celebrate all the beautiful things that we just shared with each other in the slide about our truths? And so yes, please do upvote. And let's see here. So the top thing, we're seeing a lot of people upvoting. We see visibility, listening, telling your truth, education, absolutely. Some new items here: acknowledge, show up, live openly and authentically. I think I see respectfully correct people. Beautiful, keep those coming. Let me see here if I can now scroll down. It doesn't, oh, yes, okay, show up as yourself. Now let me see if I can get this to go down a bit. Okay, it doesn't want to work on that side. Okay, so I'm going to stick to the new side right now. Communicating, believe when people say who they are. And I really appreciate on the top side, we can see that the majority of us agree that visibility, telling your truth, living openly and authentically are the top 3 priorities. I also see believe people. And so I think that might be encouraging people to believe, thank you, whoever upvoted that one. Believe people when they say who they are. It's so important, because when you do anything other than that, it is so hurtful. And you don't know if you are the first person to hurt them in this way or the 100th person to hurt them in this way. Either way, it's hurtful, and it does accumulate. Okay, thank you so much for that. So now let me see here. Oh, we are now, actually, I'm going to go back to that one. Okay, so keep those coming as we're talking. In fact, this will stay open, so you can keep adding to this. We are going to now switch to our slide deck here, and we're going to bring our panel on. And so for our panel today, as we mentioned earlier, we have myself, I'm Jamie, I use she, her pronouns. We will also have Alicia and Jonathan. And we're going to answer 2 main questions today and share our stories through these two main questions. And so our very first question we have is, what is your story? How have you experienced discrimination or erasure from the bi-pan perspective? And I'd like to kick this off to Alicia first, please.
Thank you, Jamie. You're quite the fantastic facilitator. Appreciate it. Yeah, that word cloud of the positive stuff was great, because it just made me realize how rarely I've heard people talk about bisexuality as a positive thing, which can be really hard. So I probably, as many of you here, grew up in a conservative Christian environment that was rather steeped in purity culture. And the Seventh-day Adventist Church is where I it's kind of my heritage denomination, and where I still do a lot of ministry. And I think for me, growing up, and my hope is that for a lot of people this is changing, but for me growing up, there was, you were gay or you were straight. And, you know, obviously the gay people were not good Christians, right? This is how it was framed and thought about. But that people were bi, like as an orientation, not just that they, as you know, you talk about, you know, the sexual behavior, not just that they were sexually greedy or whatever, but the idea that there was an orientation where you have the capacity to be attracted to your own or other genders was not something that was even on my radar at all, not even a little bit. And, you know, it's hard to see something when there's no category for it. It's hard to recognize the feelings you're having when there's no category for it, no word for it, no one ever talks about it, and it's not modeled anywhere. So I would have, you know what, in retrospect, were very clear experiences of attraction to women. And I was even socially aware that I had to be careful to hide them. And yet I was not aware of what was happening, because I was also attracted to men, very attracted to men. So it was, you know, it's funny when you talk about bi people being confused, that always makes me laugh, because I was confused before I knew I was bi. Being bi is what made me not confused anymore, because I spent a lot of years not understanding what I was doing, and why my relationships were the way that they were. And you know, people would think I was gay because my gender presentation is more masculine, and I would feel so misunderstood. And it wasn't because of this, and the combination of purity culture, and just the sexual repression in general, and even more so for women, that we're not supposed to just understand, appreciate, and experience our sense of attraction and our sexuality in a broad sense. It was much, much later in life that I understood what was happening to me. It wasn't until I was 30 that I realized in like an undeniable way that I was in love with a woman. And so I didn't come out until some years after that. I didn't really accept myself as bi until some years after that. And that's why this conversation is so important to me, because I've just experienced so many years of just like confusion and challenges and pain from not having any visibility of bi people at all, or any conversation around it. And so I am that person who's constantly correcting people and saying, no, I'm bi, even though, you know, for a lot of reasons, I mostly, or pretty much exclusively now, date women. That doesn't change my sexual orientation, and I'm still bi. Like, and it's never going to change. And, you know, in theory, someday I could end up with a man, and then everyone would be like, oh, she was telling the truth. But I am that person who's constantly saying like, no, I'm bi, like, no, I'm bi. And people often question me on it and say, but are you really? And yeah, I really, truly am. And it's very important to me, because I don't want other people to experience what I experienced, and the confusion of not understanding what bi or pansexuality or non non-monosexuality is. It's just very important to me that people understand that, so they don't have to spend so much time not knowing themselves like I did. So that's more or less, yeah, that's my story from that frame anyway. Yeah.
This is Jamie. Thank you so much, Alicia, for sharing. Jonathan, would you please share next?
Certainly. I'm Jonathan Drummond. I grew up in Oklahoma, where not only does the wind come sweeping down the plain, but you got to hide in the closet if you're anything but straight. But Alicia and I have presented before, so I know that we have a little slightly different story, because I was aware very early on of attraction to men and women, or boys and girls. And I definitely societally understood that I wasn't supposed to act on any attraction to boys, because that was not acceptable. But I had a major event happen when I was 18. My 20-year-old brother and I were both in college, and he got outed as a gay male because he had a boyfriend and somebody had found out. And so within 12 hours, he lost his job, living arrangements, and his straight friends. And I was 18, and I thought I might try to experience expressing my bisexual side of my person. But let me tell you, this scared that younger bisexual brother into the closet. Because in Oklahoma in 1984, it was just devastating, and it was the height of the AIDS crisis. And so I like to be representative of an older generation who has a different story to tell than the younger generation. I'm so happy that things are changing. But when my brother came out, I went straight to him and I said, David, we're all on the continuum. There's no doubt that most humans are attracted or have the capacity, and I love that Robin Oakes definition, we have the capability of being attracted. And I may die thinking that we all are a little bit of all of that, because there is a continuum, and that is my story and my hope for the future, that we can just acknowledge that in the world, not everything is black and white. There's a lot of gray. So I've always had the orientation of more than one gender. Of course, I was dating a female at the time, and believe me, she and I were together 23 years. And my sexuality did not change the fact that, or cause the fact that we divorced. But life happens and people sometimes separate. I didn't actually go on a date with a guy until 6 years after my divorce. So I am the proverbial late bloomer. So I want to be a voice for people who are older and are late bloomers. But I hope that people can just know their own truth. And just like Alicia said, that you own your truth and it doesn't change. Alicia also brought up gender expression or presentation. And so we're not talking about that, but our sexuality is so complex because we have gender identity, we have gender expression, we have masculinity, presentation, or femininity, or some combination thereof. And that's why I've always endorsed the genderbread person. You can look at that online to see that we are all a mix. And so I've just been an advocate for acknowledging that in the world, that you can feel okay. And it's okay to be bisexual or pansexual and be in a heterosexually presenting relationship. And because sometimes the queer folks don't think we're queer enough, right? So, or the gay and lesbian folks do not think the bisexual, pansexual is enough because we're not in their camp. And so I always like to say, we know our own experience. And if you are only straight, and there are straight people in this conference today, you don't have our experience, but hopefully you can know that there is a vast array of expressions and gender expressions, as well as sexual orientation and attraction. So that's kind of my advocacy. And I have absolutely experienced, especially in the queer Christian environment, that when I first started speaking 7 years ago about the bi perspective, and I now say the bi pan perspective, and probably will evolve into just plain old pansexual as we learn our words better, because as I used to say, it's not about the plumbing, it's about the person. I'm absolutely attracted to more than one gender, whether that's cis or trans, and that's why I've used the word pansexual, because it includes our trans siblings. But it's just knowing your words and growing, and it does change. And if you are someone who claims grandmother doesn't you, and then one day gay or lesbian, that's fine. Just I always invite people to tell their story that I had to borrow somebody else's label, or I was evolving, because we are evolving, and there's no shame in that.
This is Jamie. Thank you so much for sharing, Jonathan. for myself, I'd like to start off with sharing how I identify today. So I use the umbrella term queer is what resonates most deeply with me. However, when I break that down, for me, there's multiple layers. The evolution of my own orientation has been an interesting and complex journey. In addition, when I take that deeper dive into queerness, for me, I acknowledge and recognize over the recent years that I am more attracted in one way to women and non-binary people, as an example, than I am to other genders. And however, I am in a mixed orientation relationship, or a hetero-presenting relationship, as can be said. And it doesn't change who I am, like Jonathan said, or my attractions. Alicia, also said the same. Now, for me, I was raised Catholic through and through, both sides of my family, immigrant families who come from very heavily colonized countries. And I also went through private parochial schools, literally from kindergarten through my undergrad experience. Started out in a Baptist school from K to 8, went to a Catholic school for high school and a Jesuit school in college. And I had no idea that I was anything other than straight growing up, because Alicia spoke to this earlier. There was no concept for it. There was no example for it. There was no allowance for it. And it wasn't literally until I was about 21, I was dating a friend at the time who, a bisexual man, and we talked about it. We're better off as friends. And he said, you know, Jamie, you should experiment. And I said, what do you mean? With women, you should date women. And my initial outward reaction was, no, ew, what are you talking about? But internally, my brain and something else inside me went, well, there's a thought. And it literally was like a light switch for me. I started to observe how I react to, and at the time it was the concept of other genders really was just women. That's a part of my evolution too, of awareness. But I recognized that I responded to women the same way that I did to men at the time. And that's where it started for me. And that's also where the hardest times of my life started, because in school, in San Francisco, out and open, you know, it's San Francisco, typical what you would expect. This was the time of MySpace. And, you know, I would get all of these questions because I had my orientation as bisexual on MySpace. Oh, does this mean that you're going to share your bed with your husband when you get married? Does this mean that you're going to have a boyfriend and a girlfriend? All of these really ignorant and hurtful questions from complete strangers. Also offers for threesomes because I'm bisexual. I must really want a threesome. And so over time, every relationship that I had until my current one had issues with me being a non-binary orientation because of all the assumptions that we talked about. That means that I'm twice as likely to cheat, that, you know, I'm going to leave them for the opposite gender. I've had family members when I was in my same gender relationship a few years ago that was getting really serious. I had family members come to me. I love them dearly. I no longer hold this against them. They asked hurtful things of me, like, oh, by the way, when our kids are around, like, you know, don't do anything in front of them because, you know, we feel like we need to explain those kinds of things to them. Or we're not even having kids yet, but when we do have kids, we're not even trying it, but when we do, please censor your relationship in front of my children. All because I was in a same gender relationship. And that, I mean, I will be honest, I was in therapy for a really long time because of that and other things. And so when I look at my relationship today, we actually just celebrated 3 years a couple of days ago. I mentioned I am in a hetero-presenting relationship, and he is a wonderful cisgender man, straight man, who is literally the first person in my dating life. And I would also say amongst a lot of just friends in general, but I do have friends who love me no matter what, who accepted all of me, never questioned and never invalidated who I am, never asked me to hide any piece of me. And it is, even though it is hetero-presenting, and I've had people question me, oh, you know, question my authenticity and the ability to do LGBTQ+ inclusion work because that is my specialty in DEI. his love for me has been the most affirming in my life. And for me, this is where it brings us to our second question for our panel, with what are our future hopes for spaces inclusive of the BIPAN community. And I'll continue this and then kick it off to the rest of our panelists. My hopes are that relationships are just relationships, whether they're hetero-presenting, mixed orientation, it shouldn't matter, that we can just be who we are amongst our friends in our closest circles, but also out in the broader world. My hopes are that we can have more discussions like this and talk openly, where it doesn't have to be one of two workshops that might be happening, or a very, a hard and intentional pull to try to make this happen, because there are so few who have been given the space to step up and help create the space and add to the space. My hope is that everyone here, that you all can continue to be a part of this, and to grow this side of not just, let's say, QCF, but our broader world, so that those of us who are most heavily impacted by oppression, in particular, we're talking about the BIPAN community, and whether that also includes, let's say, omnisexuality. We're not just talking about just bisexual and pansexual, as I mentioned, but anyone with a non-binary orientation, that we can have these brave spaces, not just safe spaces, because safe spaces, that's where comfort is, and nothing really grows in comfort. But in the brave spaces where discomfort is, where we can challenge respectfully and love openly and be authentically with each other and our differences, that is where the beauty of our world can really start to evolve. And we can start to celebrate, I come back to that word cloud. I have not had my heart smile like that in such a long time, until I saw that word cloud that we all created together. I really want to thank you all for that, because that is an important part of debunking myths and stereotypes, by openly speaking it to life and taking that chance with each other. And someone mentioned in how can we debunk this, respectfully correcting others. Absolutely. Whether it's pronouns, whether it's orientation, or whether it's just an assumption of anything. Oh, hey, actually, Jamie doesn't use those pronouns. She uses etc. Oh, hey, actually, no, Jamie's not straight. She might be in a straight looking relationship, but she's very proud to be queer. I openly use queer, which is why others have the ability to use queer. I recognize that it is still a term for some that can be hurtful because of the history that it comes with. And hopefully, as we move forward, that sense of empowerment can come and help heal. So from here, I would now like to pass it back to Alicia to please share your future hopes for spaces that are inclusive of the BIPAN community.
Yeah, I want to first begin by even addressing, and there was a question about this in the Q&A, some of the language around whether a person identifies as bi or identifies as pan, and some of the meaning around that. Robin Oakes, you referenced this definition earlier, Jamie, as a definition of bisexuality going back to the 90s, and it's pretty much the way that bisexuality has always been defined, actually, is not as attracted to men or women, but attracted to my own gender or other genders. So, sometimes people get confused because bi, and they think binary, and they think, there's nothing less binary than being bisexual, actually. And sometimes, and I personally identify as both bi and pan, because I've never heard a definition of either that would exclude me. And I think sometimes there's this very unnatural division within our community between people who say that they're bi and people who say that they're pan. Really, it's that bi plus umbrella that is very inclusive. And even if you look at the bisexual flag, it's not 2 colors, it's 3 colors to express male, female, and non-binary identities. And I think the bi community has always been very inclusive in general. There's exceptions of non-binary folks and trans folks. And I think just kind of, you know, embracing that kind of reality of those words, that so that we don't have this kind of unnatural division within our own community, I think is a hope that I have. And I think that a lot of that has actually come from people who don't identify as bi, defining what bi means. And that's been the root of a lot of it, and a lot of just misunderstanding of bi people, which is so rampant. So that's kind of part of my hope, is that we heal ourselves. But also, like, I can't tell you how many people I know who identify as either gay or straight or lesbian and have come to me and said, well, you know, I'm actually kind of bi, after I went on my bi rant that I always go on. Like, I can't tell you how many people I know who have done that, because there is so much stigma. I can't speak so much to the male dating world, but so many lesbian women will just straight up say, right, even when they know I'm bi and I'm around, I don't date bi women. And I just think it's so closed-minded, and it's so stigmatizing, and it's just like, come on, can I catch a break anywhere? You know, and it's really difficult. But I think even for me, going back to kind of my gender presentation being more masculine, sometimes it doesn't matter how much I say that I'm bi, people still think that I'm gay. They still think I'm lesbian. And I think that that's even harder for women who have a more feminine presentation, because it's more difficult for me to date men because of my gender presentation. It's more difficult for them to date women, and it shouldn't be that way. Okay, the straights are going to do what the straights are going to do, but our community should be better than that. I don't know, our community should be better than that, and more open to just accepting people as they are and where they are, and like believing what people say. And, you know, if somebody rejects you or leaves you to go to somebody else, if that somebody else is a man, it doesn't mean it happened because they were bi. It's a thing that happened. And I think it's really complex. Everything that goes into that is really, really complex, about why some of those things happen. I could take an hour and talk about all those things, and I'm not going to do that because we have other panelists. But it's kind of, you know, my hope that we could just move beyond that and be more accepting of people where they are, regardless of their gender expression, their gender identity, their sexual orientation, and that we as a queer community can be just more accepting and loving and inclusive along those lines. The way, you know, because we're not going to find that for most people in general in the straight cis community. It's just not there. But that's the kind of community we are supposed to be building as queer people. And so that's I think my biggest hope moving forward, is that we could have more understanding and acceptance along those lines.
This is Jamie. Thank you, Alicia. And I want to quickly add on to something you said earlier that really hit home with me when you talked about, you know, more femme presenting people and how hard it is to date. You see my hair now. For most of my life, my hair was really long. I mean, I looked every part of feminine that it could be. And people often assumed that I was straight until they saw some of the things I did. Then they assumed I was lesbian. And I told myself, wouldn't it be great if I looked at least questionably queer? And so it took me a long time to gather the courage to cut my hair off and then do the undercut at the same time. And you know what? It was the most freeing experience. This hair is more me than I ever thought it would be. And then I thought, why did it take me so long to do this, you know? But it's true. It makes it easier to kind of signal to others, hey, I'm here and I'm queer too. So, but that's enough of my story. Jonathan, please share your hopes for the future.
Yeah, thank you, Jamie. I think Alicia did just an awesome job explaining the grace that we should come to this conversation. I mean, I have friends who are 10 years older than me, and they shudder when I use the word queer. So let's be sensitive. And so if you're 25, you may not know what the 65-year-old thinks, but my 65-year-old friends shudder at queer. And I love that all three of us have used that as an inclusive, and we've reclaimed that word. And it's we all come to this conversation with our own understandings of what words mean. And that's where we can get into trouble. And so we just need to believe if Alicia says bisexual includes all people, that's what it means. But I understand that there are people in the crowd that doesn't, that sets up a binary, and I appreciate that. It's just, I think it's all about intent. And I do believe that QCF is unbelievably inclusive. There's no biphobia or transphobia officially from this organization. They've worked so hard over the last 10 years to become more and more inclusive of all. And it's how we're triggered, right? And so sometimes I get triggered when somebody says words, and I just have to think, what is their intention? And if their intention is not maleficent, it's really just a benign misunderstanding, then I can forgive that. But I do think it's our duty to stand up and correct and be called out. And if somebody needs to call me out, I'm happy to be called out because I do make mistakes in speaking. But the hope is that we don't have to come on, and when I speak, I normally say, we're going to use some words, definitions, and then we're going to set them aside because they really don't mean much except for a conversation starter. And so whatever you want to call yourself, I'd say call yourself that. And then if somebody else identifies differently, receive that. Just receive that for them. But my hope for the future is that we can normalize the non-binary experience. As we know, studies have shown, 1/3 of the queer male is bisexual and 2/3 of the queer female are in the bisexual continuum. That's out there, and I am a medical doctor by training, so I look at studies and I look at the research. There is a lot of people who are in straight presenting marriages, and they have been, like Jamie said, in a religious institution growing up that they couldn't express anything but straight, but they on the inside know. And so there are research out there asking the right question. When you ask what is your orientation, we tend to not identify in public polls, but when you say, well, who are you attracted to? And I love the question they say, are you exclusively attracted to the opposite gender? 91% of males say that is a true statement. That means 9% in public polls acknowledge attraction to something other than the opposite gender. So I just would like to normalize that you can be bisexual and still be in a straight presenting marriage, and you can be bisexual and be in a gay presenting relationship. It's okay just to normalize that. And I think in 20, 30, 40 years from now, it will be normal. That's my hope. And that's why we need to bring in the entire spectrum of ages, the people who are older than me, the middle-aged people, the younger people, just to have a little bit of grace and hope for the future that we can be gentle as people are learning and allow people to change and allow people to grow and be a part of their growth. So that's my hope.
This is Jamie. Thank you so much, Jonathan. I really appreciate that both you and Alicia have brought the conversation back to terminology. I acknowledge that we did not have time at the first part of our presentation to really dive into the terminology because we wanted to get into, as they say, the meat and potatoes of our discussion today. And so yes, terminology is always evolving. In part of my story, I mentioned, when I first came out, I don't think, in fact, I clarified, I came out as bisexual because it was the only term that we had. Later on, pansexual came around, and it felt right because it was more inclusive of trans folks. And then at the time, pansexuality and omnisexuality, as an example, were used interchangeably. But now, because I look these words up a lot because I also am looking for the word that will help me celebrate more of who I am. And sure enough, omnisexual has evolved. So pansexual, think of it as gender blind. Regardless of gender, you are attracted to other genders. Where omnisexual, at least today, now means with an awareness of the other person's gender, you experience attraction. So where for me, like I mentioned, women and non-binary people, I am more attracted to, I am to men and other genders. That's, for me, it feels closer. But it's also it's such a complicated word, and it's also, people hypersexualize it because of the term sexual in our orientations, which is why for me, queer has felt better. And also, Jonathan, thank you for acknowledging the harm that it can cause for older generations who lived through the era of queer being derogatory. But now today, it has come up as a term of empowerment. And so if you all haven't had a chance to look at our handout goes through many different definitions. It breaks down the difference between bisexual, pansexual, and different things. So it's something that you can keep and take with you. So from here, now we have about 15 minutes left in our presentation, and this will be the wrap up and closing part. So we are now going to go into our next poll everywhere question. This is how we will, and thank you. Oh, this is still growing. I love that this is still growing. Thank you. Our next question will be, where did my little thing go? Okay. Oh, there you go. All right. Okay, so this is how you feel free to use the chat, and Alicia and Jonathan will be here to support asking questions in chat. You can also do it here. If you do it through Poll Everywhere, I'll be able to see the questions as well. But this is our open question and answer time. This is upvoting. So if you see a question that you also would like to hear the answer to, please do upvote. As you've seen, the software is a little wonky, so I'll be able to see the top questions and the newest questions. But this is open. Please ask your questions, either here or in chat. As we're waiting, do we have any other questions in the chat box?
There are none yet.
Okay, and here's our first question. How do you overcome internalized biphobia? I feel like I want to be a lesbian and have trouble accepting my attraction to men. That is a great question. I want to give Alicia and Jonathan a chance. Would either of you like to answer that first?
I don't know, I'll take a stab. I think that for me, part of it has been just living into it in terms of really being vocal about being bi, and really being, I'm very proud, actually. I feel like it's a gift being bi, and I think learning to appreciate and lean into that. I feel like there's so much to appreciate about it. Like, I feel like it's not just the kind of relationships that we can enter, but it's the lens through which we see the world, where we have an innate understanding of love on more levels than most people do. And it's just much easier and more natural for us to understand any relationship, any attraction, any kind of love, because we don't experience gender as a barrier to that. And I think just learning to appreciate that and think about the positive things, and also living into it by talking about it and being open about it, I think it has helped me. I'm not sure that's the best answer, but those have helped. Those things have helped me. I really love being bi and pan.
Thank you, Alicia. This is Jonathan. I agree. Just embrace it. I mean, I think we have to learn not to fight our emotions. When you feel an emotion, that is your emotion, and just own it. The next question is, what's the difference between bigender and bisexual? Alicia talked about this a little bit earlier, because we do, when we're having conversations publicly, we do sometimes have to parse out the words. And gender is, that gender with which you identify. And so that is not your attraction, that is not your orientation, that is by definition something completely different. We get confused in the LGBTQ community because LG and B are orientations, lesbian, gay, and bisexual, and trans would be a gender identity. And so we're just speaking about different things. Obviously, they all come into play. Our presentation, our gender identity and expression, and our orientation. But when we speak about those two, that's how I would respond to that question. Orientation is your attraction and relationship status, and gender identity and expression is your gender.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. This is Jamie. Yes, so bigender refers to gender, and bisexual refers to orientation, who you are physically, emotionally, or romantically attracted to. And so it appears, is there a question about transphobia in the chat?
There's some conversation going on about it.
Okay.
I'm not sure there's specifically a question. Somebody just said that as a bi trans person, they experience the bi community as being very much inclusive of bi people, which I've seen as well. And yeah, I don't know. Yeah, if you're trans and haven't transitioned and your partner is bi, you're in luck.
Thank you, Alicia. This is Jamie. Okay, so I'm going to continue on with the questions here. And well, on that note, I think what a lot of this is coming back to, and because I do see here a question, how do you be supportive of another partner? Be there for them, listen, believe them. You know, I can say, you know, what my partner does for me is what works for me, but it might be different for others. You know, my partner celebrates and affirms my queerness more than I do sometimes. And for me, I find it such a beautiful thing. And it really just comes back to a lot of the things that you would do to care for a person. When stigmas and stereotypes come up, when someone's being bullied, if you would naturally step up to someone who's being bullied for any reason, that's where you would want to lean into, to stop the bullying, to do the respectful corrections, to stand up to those who are perpetuating the myths. Let's see, I also saw, yes, so in terms of the question for sharing the word cloud, we'll figure out how to share the handout. Our conference facilitators help do that for us the first time, but we'll make sure to get the word cloud up. And then there was also a question, how to be visible while making orientation identity not a big deal. And so that's a tough question, because what could be a big deal for one person is not a big deal for another. It's really difficult. And at the same time, how can you not be visible without making something bigger than the status quo, if that makes sense? And so it does remind me of the story when I first came out, and this is a sense of kind of transferred oppression or horizontal oppression, where one of my own gay friends was like, Jamie, stop throwing your bisexuality in her face. And this was because I was posting things on Facebook of me with my very first girlfriend. And that was really hurtful. I feel like today I stand up and speak more about my queerness than I ever did then, but it's not as big of a deal because I'm doing it through the lens of leading, learning, leaning into being a a role model for those who didn't have someone who looked like me and identify like me growing up. Alicia, Jonathan, do you have anything to add to that question?
I don't think, I think those two things are actually at odds with each other, because the queer community, and especially the straight community, doesn't really want us to be really vocal about being bi. That's what bi erasure and bi invisibility are all about, you know, erasing bi identities and not feeling comfortable with people identifying as being bi. So because there's this environment, because there's this stigma and this desire to erase our identities, I think people are going to feel uncomfortable when we refuse to buy into that. And it's just going to be uncomfortable. It's just going to, the more I do it, the more comfortable it is. So I've gotten to the point where it's kind of comfortable to me. And I just in a gentle, you can be gentle about it. You don't have to be angry or offended. You know, you just understand where people are coming from and that they're on hopefully a path of growth. And just to, you know, I often just subtly, you know, if somebody calls me a lesbian or calls me gay, I'll just subtly say, oh, I'm bi actually. Just, it doesn't have to be fireworks or anything like that. But it's not, you're not going to, it's not going to be totally comfortable. It's just not. So I think just letting go of that expectation and being okay, being uncomfortable. And we never really grow if we're not uncomfortable. So yeah.
If I can speak, this is Jonathan, if I can just speak to another, just a backdoor concept here, is if you're in a relationship, you have to be also sensitive to your your partner, right? Because I remember I was speaking in Chicago, and we were talking about myths or we've been hurt, and a gentleman in the room said, I'm here, and I told my friends I was going to this queer conference, and like, well, does your wife know? Because he was in a heterosexual relationship, and it was so hurtful to him. Because he had a supportive partner. But there are partners who, if they were in a straight relationship and their partner came out as bi, they may have their own insecurities. We're but humans. We're frail, fragile, vulnerable people. And sometimes, because the myth is so prevalent that a bisexual or pansexual is inherently promiscuous. That's the word I was looking for. No, we're not. I was asked one time, Jonathan, I just can't believe you're bisexual because I just can't see you having sex with a man and a woman at the same time. Because his definition was basically orgy. And this was an educated white cisgender male who just had no clue what it meant to be of an orientation that was non-binary. So we have to be sensitive to our straight allies really have no clue sometimes.
Yes, thank you so much, Jonathan. This is Jamie. Let me see here. So now we're going to take this last question before we move on. Where do you see the best representation in media of bi-pan orientations? So for me, I have seen a lot of representation. If you are a fan of anime, for example, anime is, it can be hard to find the actual LGBTQ+ anime. But Netflix has an actual section where if you search what representation matters or LGBTQ, it will pop up a bunch of different shows and TV shows. In fact, just last night, I was crying my eyes out because I finally finished the last season of Supergirl. For those of you who aren't familiar, Supergirl is a wonderfully inclusive show. They have, as an example, a trans actress playing a trans superhero. They have characters who identify as queer, and it's just a natural part of the story. And they even show the struggle of identity, and even Supergirl experienced that struggle. And it made me cry because it was such a beautiful exploration of self, of each other, of a community with this lens of being inclusive of LGBTQ+ folks. And so I really, really appreciated that. Not necessarily in media, but this is where my Dungeons and Dragons nerdiness comes in. There are, for example, Facebook groups, and also the D&D Twitter community is very inclusive of the LGBTQ+ community, and especially inclusive of non-binary orientations and non-binary people. And so that's where I will find my most affirming spaces that are more social. So like on Facebook, there is I think it's Dungeons, Dragons, and Diversity. There's another one that is specifically for, I want to say, women and non-binary Dungeons and Dragons players. That, for me, is what works very well. Jonathan, Alicia, anything for you?
I think I remember actually pretty clearly the first time I ever saw on media someone just coming out as bi. It was on Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Was it? I don't remember her name. It was somebody saying the concept of Rosa. Yeah, and she just said like, "Oh, I'm bisexual," and I was like, "What just happened?" It's just I feel like it's so rare to see like in mainstream media there's a portrayal of somebody who's bi. Yeah, there's not a lot of it anyway. I'm going to cheat and say something else that's been on my mind a lot, and I know I talked about this before, but as we're talking, we have these different definitions of bisexual, pansexual, omnisexual, demisexual, and I think the nuances of the differences in those can be helpful and affirming and help people to understand themselves better. I just hope we don't lose the things that connect us as a community in doing that sometimes, because it is an umbrella that we are all very much connected. And for example, when you speak about an operational definition, which is like what people use in research. So researchers will have an operational definition, and it's not how people identify, but it's how people behave or what their history is or something like that. And they've found, researchers in operational definitions that there's no difference, for example, between someone who says I'm bisexual and somebody who says I don't think labels matter. So essentially, operationally, people who say I don't think labels matter from a psychology research perspective generally behave the same way as people who say I'm bisexual. And I'm going to guess that that would also be the case for people who say I'm pansexual or I'm omnisexual, because there's so much that connects us beyond what divides us. And that's why, when we speak about advocacy and the need to be visible within the queer community and the larger community, we need to remember that we're much more united than we are divided as a group. And if we want to advocate and have visibility, we have to recognize that. Like, I mean, bi, pan, omni, I fit all of those. I'm not demisexual, however, but I do fit all of those first three. And, you know, I just think that's incredibly important as we think about how to move forward and how to create a better world and more space for those of us who are under that umbrella.
I'm going to say amen to that. This is Jonathan, and thank you, Jamie, for leading us today. It's been a great panel, and it is awesome to see so many people show up. 63 or so people came together to have this very important conversation. So thank you for being here.
This is Jamie. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Alicia. Thank you all for joining us today. Please continue to share your key takeaways. I know we are just a minute over. We are also just as grateful for all of you. You also see here this QR code. This QR code is to our personal feedback. We would love to hear from you for what you liked best about this workshop, what you would like to see more of, or what you didn't like. We're always looking for feedback so that we can improve better for next time. We will leave these key takeaways open while I move to our thank you slide, which really is our QR code once again. So I will make sure to export the responses for both the key takeaways and also the word cloud. We'll get that uploaded into Whova. But again, thank you all so much. And I also want to acknowledge our interpreters today. Thank you so much, Gwen and Elsa. And also thank you to Joseph from QCF for being our help today. Have a wonderful, wonderful day, everyone. We will be here. I don't know if we need to close right now, but we'll be here until we close the webinar. Thank you all so much.
Awesome. This is Joseph, your QFC host. I just want to say, everybody, thank you for being here. Thank you, our presenters. If you are an attendee, can I please ask you to flood the chat with thanks and see if we can break it. Awesome. Thank you all. We are ending the webinar. Have a good rest of your conference.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.